Welcome to the AI On podcast, where real conversations meet impossible guests. We bring you the world-class minds you could never otherwise meet, and you even get to connect with them and continue the discussion after the show. And remember, these guests are AI-generated personas who are entirely fictional, and they are not intended to represent anything or anyone from the real world. And now, here's your real-life host, Luke, with our next guest, because sometimes the best ideas come from the conversations no one else can have.
Liam, welcome to the podcast. Great to have you with us today, and here to talk about supply chain resiliency and the state of global supply chains today. So let's start with the big picture, because we live in some pretty interesting times. From your perspective, how's the changing geopolitical situation actually impacting supply chains around the world?
Thanks for having me. Delighted to be here. 2025 feels a bit like playing chess during an earthquake. The board is constantly shifting, and you have to adapt mid-move. And supply chains are at the heart of it all because they connect the world's economies. So when politics shakes things up, we feel the tremors immediately. Take the ongoing shifts in trade alliances, for instance. We're seeing more regionalization, with countries leaning into localized production and nearshoring to reduce dependency on distant partners. Then there's the issue of sanctions and tariffs. Those are becoming tools of diplomacy, and they can throw entire supply chains into chaos. And the other side of regionalization is the shift from a global-first mindset to a regional or country-first approach. The past few years have been like a masterclass in disruption, from trade wars to the pandemic to geopolitical tensions. Businesses have learned the hard way that relying on far-flung supply chains can leave you exposed. And this brings some interesting challenges for supply chain pros. Setting up regional supply chains takes time and investment, and in some regions, infrastructure still needs a lot of work. But as companies weigh the trade-offs between cost efficiency and resilience, especially resilience to trade barriers, regionalization is proving to be a smart play for the long game.
So we've definitely seen regionalization, nearshoring as increasingly strong trends, right? And as tariffs have become weaponized, I think this is only going to accelerate. I do think a lot of companies, though, are actually struggling to know which way to turn right now. And frankly, it changes week to week, right? So from your perspective, which regions or countries have the most to lose or gain from this, the world that's the way it's changing over the medium term?
You're spot on about the momentum behind nearshoring. It's one of the biggest shifts we're seeing, and the winners and losers are becoming clearer. Let's start with the winners. Southeast Asia, for example, is in a fantastic position. Countries like Vietnam, Indonesia, and Thailand have been soaking up manufacturing activity that's moved out of China. They offer competitive labor costs, improving infrastructure, and importantly, they're strategically located near major shipping lanes. It's like being on the main highway of global trade. Plus, their governments have been savvy, signing trade agreements and building partnerships to stay attractive. Mexico has been another big winner, for now, thanks to its proximity to the US and Canada and the USMCA trade agreement. It's a nearshoring hotspot. Automotive and electronics industries in particular are flocking there. Automotive, though, has possibly the most at risk if the tariff war heats up. Many vehicles produced in the US rely on parts manufactured in Mexico. Now, for those with the most to lose, for sure China is facing challenges. Don't get me wrong, they're still an economic powerhouse and will remain vital to global supply chains for years. But as companies diversify and reduce their reliance on any one country, China's dominance is eroding, bit by bit. Add geopolitical tensions to the mix, sanctions, tariffs, and export controls, and you've got a recipe for slower growth in areas they once dominated. The European Union has an interesting mix of gain and risk. Countries like Poland and the Czech Republic stand to benefit from reshoring within Europe, especially in industries like automotive and pharmaceuticals. But on the flip side, regions within the EU that depend on cheap imports from Asia may see higher costs and slower growth. Africa is an intriguing wild card. Countries like Kenya, Ethiopia, and Ghana have incredible potential, particularly for sectors like textiles and agriculture. But to truly capitalize, they need better infrastructure and more investment in workforce development. If the investment comes, they could become the next big manufacturing hubs. If it doesn't, they might miss the wave entirely.
Well, Mexico's having a very turbulent time right now. But before we go there, let's talk a bit more about Africa and the opportunities you see in Africa. It's not actually a region I see so much conversation around yet.
What makes Africa so interesting to me is that it's not just about opportunity, it's about timing and execution. Let me break it down. First, the demographics are hugely in Africa's favor. The continent has one of the youngest and fastest growing populations in the world. That means a massive, emerging workforce, hungry for jobs and ready to drive industries forward. If you look at countries like Ethiopia and Ghana, they're already making strides in textiles and agriculture, tapping into global markets. Ethiopia, for instance, is positioning itself as a major hub for apparel production, offering lower labor costs than even Southeast Asia. Infrastructure is the key challenge, though. Ports, roads, and rail networks in many African countries still lag behind global standards. But this is starting to change. Investments like Kenya's Mombasa, Nairobi, Standard Gauge Railway, and Morocco's Tangier Med Port are showing what's possible. These kinds of projects can act as catalysts, making it easier for African nations to plug into global supply chains. Another area to watch is technology. Mobile payment systems like M-Pesa in Kenya have already leapfrogged traditional banking infrastructure. Imagine if the same leapfrogging could happen in supply chain technologies. That could level the playing field in ways we haven't seen before. Trade agreements are also critical. Initiatives like the African Continental Free Trade Area are game changers. By reducing intercontinental tariffs and encouraging regional trade, Africa could finally tap into its own market of over 1 billion people. That's something many other regions don't have, a huge, untapped internal market to build resilience from within. If Africa can continue attracting foreign investment while nurturing its local talent and industries, I think it could become a significant player. But of course, this isn't a one-size-fits-all story. Each country has unique challenges and advantages. Let's see how this plays out over the next few years.
Okay, that's interesting. Let's go back to Mexico because they managed to sidestep the first wave of tariffs of 2025, but the threat is clearly still there, and at least as of today. And let's say that the major tariffs get reapplied over the coming months and Mexico starts struggling to deal with that. I'm curious, is there anywhere else in Central Latin America that you think may step into Mexico's space if this is what happens?
That's a great question. And I think if tariffs on Mexico become a reality, we're looking at a few strong contenders in Central and Latin America that could step up and take some of that nearshoring momentum. There's 4 that stand out for me. Costa Rica is already punching above its weight when it comes to high-tech manufacturing. It's got a highly educated workforce and has positioned itself as a hub for industries like medical devices and electronics. Companies like Intel are already there, so it has a track record of attracting global players. Plus, its focus on renewable energy and environmental practices makes it an appealing choice for companies prioritizing sustainability in their supply chains. Then you have Colombia, which is incredibly well located. It has coastlines on both the Atlantic and Pacific, which is a huge logistical advantage. They've been improving infrastructure steadily, and sectors like textiles, agriculture, and even light manufacturing are growing. What's exciting about Colombia is the government's active push to attract investment. It's like they're saying, we're open for business, and companies are starting to take notice. Guatemala gets a lot of press for other reasons, but it is an interesting one because it's so close to the US, which makes transportation times and costs very competitive. They've got a strong foothold in agriculture and textiles already, but there's real potential to expand into manufacturing. What's key here is the cost advantage. Labor costs are lower than Mexico's, which could make it very appealing for industries like apparel or consumer goods. And then there's Panama, which is a bit different because it's not necessarily a manufacturing hub, it's a logistics powerhouse. The Panama Canal gives it an unmatched strategic advantage, and the infrastructure around the canal is world class. It's ideal for companies that need assembly or distribution operations because they can tap into one of the best connected regions in the world. If tariffs on Mexico drive companies to look elsewhere, I wouldn't be surprised to see businesses spread operations across a few of these to diversify risks and play to each country's strengths.
From what I've seen, I think Colombia has already started to do well on this over the recent years, right? They come with a highly educated workforce. You mentioned the strong logistical connections on either side, and then this open welcome for business. I think if it can stay off the target list for tariffs, then I can definitely see it doing well actually in this new space. We'll be interested to see what happens to each of those over the coming year. Now, if I look more broadly here, what's a blind spot you think that most businesses have in supply chain management today that nobody actually is talking about, or you don't think enough people are?
So I think the big headlines often overshadow some of the more subtle challenges. One blind spot that doesn't get nearly enough attention is the over-reliance on visibility tools without acting on the data they generate. Let me explain. Over the past decade, businesses have invested heavily in technologies like real-time tracking, IoT, and AI-powered platforms to monitor every inch of their supply chains. And don't get me wrong, these tools are fantastic. They let you see where a shipment is, predict delays, and even assess risks. But here's the problem. Many companies stop at visibility. They collect all this data, but they don't have the processes to act on what the data is telling them. For example, let's say a business gets an early warning about a supplier facing disruptions due to geopolitical risks. Instead of proactively diversifying their supplier base, they might delay action because making that change feels too costly or complicated. By the time the disruption hits, it's too late. They've got visibility but no agility. Another blind spot is the human element in supply chains. We get so caught up in tech and processes that we forget about the people. A supply chain isn't just machines and algorithms, it's people making decisions at every stage. Training, empowering, and retaining those people, whether they're factory workers, logistics coordinators, or managers, makes a world of difference. Without them, even the best technology falls flat.
So I can definitely agree with you on the human aspect. As far as I'm concerned, human talent is the core of successful supply chains, and it's going to be for years to come. You also, though, highlight the hype around digital. Today it's AI. Previously, it was all about blockchain, plenty of other things. Now, from your perspective, what's the biggest misconception about then these technologies, and which companies do you think are actually managing to make technology work well for them?
Oh, there are plenty of misconceptions about AI and blockchain, but let me give you the two that stand out. First, the idea that AI is a magic bullet. People hear AI and think it'll fix everything. Forecasting, risk management, cost optimization, you name it. But here's the thing, AI is only as good as the data it's trained on. If your data is messy, incomplete, or outdated, the AI's outputs will reflect that. It's a classic garbage in, garbage out scenario. I've seen companies spend millions implementing AI systems, only to realize later that they need to overhaul their entire data infrastructure just to make the technology useful. Now let's talk about blockchain. The biggest misconception here is that blockchain is a necessity for every supply chain. It's a brilliant tool for certain things. If you want to track the origin of food products or ensure authenticity in pharmaceuticals, blockchain can create an unalterable record of every step in the process. But not every supply chain needs that level of transparency. If you're moving bulk commodities like coal or steel, the cost of implementing and maintaining blockchain will far outweigh the benefits. Plus, blockchain's touted immutability isn't perfect. The data going into the chain still relies on trust. Someone has to input it, and if they get it wrong or tamper with it at the source, the blockchain doesn't magically fix that. Now, when it comes to who does it well, there are many companies out there that make technology a competitive advantage in managing their supply chains. Walmart is a well-known leader in this, and they've invested heavily in automation and artificial intelligence to streamline their processes. They aren't stopping there, though, and recently announced an agreement with robotics company Symbotic to automate their distribution centers, aiming to improve efficiency and accuracy in order fulfillment. In the beauty industry, companies like Ulta Beauty and L'Oreal are leveraging artificial intelligence to enhance their supply chain management. Ulta Beauty has invested in AI haircare systems, while L'Oreal has developed various AI-driven tools to optimize their operations. These initiatives aim to provide personalized services, reduce operational costs, and revolutionize marketing strategies by leveraging extensive consumer data. Then there's Shein, the online fast fashion retailer. They've utilized AI to adjust their supply chain rapidly in response to customer demands, listing hundreds of thousands of items for a global market. AI helps them reduce inventory waste and operational costs by predicting trends and analyzing preferences and sharing this data with suppliers. This waste reduction is claimed to be part of their solution to the environmental issues they have been under scrutiny for, too.
Yeah, I think blockchain ended up being the most overhyped of all, and I've been a little disappointed with how it struggled to deliver against that. I'm hopeful, though, that there's a lot more promise in the recent AI wave. Again, proof is in the pudding and in delivering material efficiencies and improved outcomes that actually have an impact in the real world, right? So I want to now switch away from that big picture from the supply chain to your own journey as a manager and as a leader. And you've gone from working on the ships to leading at the executive level. Are there lessons that you take from those early days that are still alive in the leadership style that you have today?
It's all about remembering where you started. On the ships, every decision had immediate consequences, whether it was securing cargo or navigating storms. That taught me the value of clear communication, quick thinking, and trust in your team. Those lessons don't go away just because the setting changes. Even at the executive level, I focus on keeping things practical and straightforward, ensuring that every person on the team, from the boardroom to the warehouse, knows their role and feels valued. It's that same sense of shared responsibility I learned at sea, just applied on a bigger scale.
Trusting your team for sure resonates really strongly with me. And I've learned that you're only as good as the team that you build around you and the culture that you create with them, right? Given your experiences both on the water and off it, what would you say was one leadership mistake that you see people making over and over again? And is there any advice that you can give to leaders to avoid that?
One mistake I see time and time again is leaders trying to do everything themselves, carrying the entire load on their shoulders. It's almost like they believe delegating or asking for input is a sign of weakness. But here's the truth. Leadership isn't about having all the answers. It's about building a team that can find the answers together. I've seen this play out in crisis situations especially. A leader gets overwhelmed by the complexity of a problem, so they double down and try to control every aspect. What ends up happening? Decisions are delayed, mistakes multiply, and morale sinks because the team feels sidelined. My advice? Trust your people. Build that trust long before the storm hits. Give them ownership over their parts of the process, and they'll often surprise you with creative solutions or insights you wouldn't have thought of. And when it comes to decision making, don't be afraid to admit what you don't know. It's better to bring the team into the fold than to pretend you have everything under control when you don't. Another thing I'd add is the importance of listening more than you speak. Some leaders feel they need to dominate conversations to show strength, but real strength comes from understanding your team, your stakeholders, and even your competitors. Listening helps you make better decisions, and it shows respect, which builds loyalty. I'd like to hear your take. Do you think leaders sometimes put too much pressure on themselves to appear infallible?
I learned a long time ago that I am not infallible. And I really do believe that leaders absolutely have to get comfortable with the discomfort of recognizing when they're wrong and being willing to change course. I think it's equally important to have courage in your convictions. So really it's about getting that balance between setting a direction and then you go full throttle after that, and then being open-minded enough to measure your success and decide when it's right to pivot. So now, what's one piece of advice that you would give to leaders that feels counterintuitive, but for you has made a huge difference over your career?
I say it was probably slow down to move faster. It sounds backward, doesn't it? In high stakes situations, the natural instinct is to push forward, act quickly, and keep the momentum going. But what I've learned, both at sea and in business, is that rushing often leads to more mistakes, wasted effort, and frustration. When I've stepped back, taken a breath, and assessed the bigger picture, I've found better, more sustainable paths forward. One example that stands out is from my time managing logistics for a humanitarian crisis. We had urgent supplies that needed to reach a flood affected region in Southeast Asia. Every second counted, and the pressure was immense. But when we looked at the available routes, none of them were reliable enough to guarantee delivery. Instead of charging ahead with the least bad option, we paused, brought in local knowledge, and devised an entirely new plan using fishing boats. That delay, what some might see as indecision, actually saved time in the long run because it avoided wasted resources and failed attempts. I also think this applies to team management. Slowing down to listen to people, understand their concerns, and get their buy-in makes execution faster and smoother later. It's like tightening the sails before a storm. Taking that time up front makes everything more efficient when things get rough.
There's something in that that's a bit like the old adage of measure twice and cut once, right? So actually thinking through a plan and doing it right does make it much more likely that you're going to succeed. Now, talking of success, so and coming back to the industry more broadly, for managers listening to this and looking to make their own supply chains more resilient, what are three practical recommendations that you would give that go beyond the usual, the basics?
Yeah, so let's move beyond the usual advice about diversifying suppliers or keeping extra inventory. I've got three takeaways that might surprise you but can make a huge difference. First, look at how you can build relationships beyond the contract. This might sound touchy-feely, but it's actually strategic. Most managers think of suppliers purely in transactional terms. Here's the order, deliver it on time. But in moments of disruption, those relationships can be your lifeline. Get to know your suppliers, not just the sales rep, but their leadership team and even their operational folks. Understand their challenges, their capacity, and how they make decisions. When a crisis hits, those relationships mean you're more likely to get prioritized. One company I worked with even started reverse audits, where they visited suppliers to find bottlenecks and helped them solve issues before they became problems. It's collaboration, not just compliance. Then stress test your supply chain like it's an engineering project. We talk about stress testing financial systems all the time, but why not your supply chain? Create scenarios that mimic real-world disruptions, natural disasters, cyber attacks, or geopolitical shifts, and see where the cracks form. Bring in your team, simulate the disruption, and work through how you'd respond. It's not about making things perfect, it's about identifying weak points before they fail. Plus, it builds muscle memory for when a real crisis happens. And I think you should also look at how you can tap into hidden capacity. Most managers don't think about what's outside their immediate network, but tapping into local or community-based resources can be a game changer. For example, during the humanitarian crisis I mentioned earlier, we used fishing boats to deliver aid when roads were wiped out. The same principle applies in commercial supply chains. If your primary transport network fails, is there a local courier or regional player who can step in? Could a neighboring factory take on some overflow production? Mapping out these unconventional options in advance can give you incredible flexibility. What I love about these perspectives is that they're not about throwing money at the problem, they're about thinking differently.
I like those, and that first one in particular resonates for me. I'm a strong believer that the relationships you build in the calm are then what you rely on when things actually hit the fan. Now, Liam, before we wrap up, what do you recommend people read to better understand the supply chain industry today and to help themselves chart a path through what's going to be a very complex future?
A great question to end on. Besides my own Navigating the Unpredictable Seas, of course, there are a few books I often recommend for anyone looking to really get under the hood of the supply chain world. First up is The Box by Mark Levinson. This one's a classic. It's about how the humble shipping container revolutionized global trade. It's not just a history lesson, it's a story of how one simple innovation transformed the way goods move around the world. You'll never look at a container on a truck or ship the same way again. Next, The Supply Chain Revolution by Suman Sarkar. This book gets into how supply chains can go from being just a cost to a real competitive advantage. It's practical, full of real-world examples, and great for anyone who wants to think strategically about logistics. Then there is End of the Line by Barry Lynn. This one's a bit of a wake-up call. It explores how fragile global supply chains can be, especially when they're stretched too thin or disrupted by unexpected events. Lynn doesn't sugarcoat things. It's an eye-opening read that'll make you think differently about resilience. Finally, there's The New Abnormal by Yossi Sheffi. If you want to understand how the pandemic reshaped supply chains and how businesses can adapt to massive disruptions, this is the book. Sheffi offers practical lessons and real-world examples about building agility and flexibility into your operations, which is essential in today's world. If I had to pick just one to start with, it would probably be The Box. It's amazing how something as simple as a metal container changed everything.
Excellent recommendations, and Yossi Sheffi is a legend for sure. We don't have Navigating the Unpredictable Seas, but we are going to include a copy of your anthology of seafaring stories, Dark Waters, for our Patreon members. Liam, look, thanks again for joining us. It's been a fantastic conversation, and really appreciate you having us with us here on the AI On podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure to chat with you. And hey, if anyone listening takes even one small idea from today and runs with it, I'd consider that a win. Thanks again, and I'll be keeping an ear out for your next episodes.
And that was it for this episode of the AI On podcast. As with all our discussions, you'll be able to continue the conversation with Liam at our Patreon site, where a custom GPT built with his background story is ready to chat with you. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, subscribe and share, and see you next time for the AI On podcast.